The mainstream media. It's been vilified by no less than the President of the United States. So what's wrong with it? And who's filling the void? The Investigators starts now.
The media's focus on priorities, they don't line up with the rest of America.
I mean, they're becoming increasingly flagrant in their anti-Trump bias.
Now, the left is okay with this because the left dominates the culture.
Big media outlets, they put out that narrative that carries the day. And that narrative is usually the establishment narrative.
I must tell you, Fox has treated me fairly. Fox treated me fairly.
When people say mainstream media, what do you hear?
I hear a pejorative label for somebody who doesn't agree with your point of view.
I'm Diana Swain. We're the Investigators. This is what we do. Welcome to this special edition of the Investigators from Washington. We were last here just days before the inauguration, and then there was talk the new president would eliminate the press pool, that the daily briefings wouldn't even be held at the White House, but somewhere across the street. So 8 months later, what's the real state of things?
The day that there isn't some friction between the White House press corps and the White House is the day that somebody in the press corps is not doing their job.
Barack Obama's then press secretary, Josh Earnest, telling us about that built-in tension days before handing the podium over to his successors.
Hold on, you want to comment and you want to perpetuate a false narrative.
Actually, I did report that Clapper said that. Was the president attacking the mayor of London because he's Muslim?
Not at all. And I think to suggest something like that is utterly ridiculous.
A defensive administration, even aggressive spin from the White House is in fact nothing new. But there is a difference here.
They are the enemy of the people.
Donald Trump has slammed the media as no president before him.
It's time to expose the crooked media deceptions.
The lamestream media, he calls it.
CNN, fake. The New York Times is totally dishonest.
But Trump has also praised one news network in particular.
I must tell you, Fox has treated me fairly. Fox treated me fairly.
He frequently tweets support for what he hears from Fox commentators like Sean Hannity and on the Fox Morning Show.
Ready for tonight with J.D. Roberts. Good evening.
Canadian-born John Roberts is Fox's White House correspondent, trying to hold the administration to account.
Does the president regret at all describing these players who take a knee for the national anthem as SOBs who should be fired?
What does he think of the way the relationship between Trump and the news media has evolved? And does the president's praise for his network put him in an awkward spot? So, you've sat in the front row here for some time. You've worked for CBS, CNN, now with Fox. How would you characterize the relationship between President Trump and the news media?
Antagonistic, I think, is the word that I would probably use on both sides.
So what we are seeing is representative of what's really taking place?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, when the camera is on in the briefing room, the level of antagonism is a little higher than when we were having those off-camera briefings for a number of weeks.
Which you walked out of at one point, right?
I walked out of an off-camera briefing because it was coming up on 3 o'clock, and I had to go out to the
so not a protest
to do a live shot. No, it wasn't a protest. And then, I have a good relationship with Sarah Huckabee Sanders, and we needle each other. And so she needled me on the way out, saying, "Oh, you're leaving? You're bored?" And I turned around and I said, "Well, if it was on camera, I might not be." But I was leaving to do a live shot. I had to do it.
You say antagonistic. Any more antagonistic than it's been before? When Josh Earnest was standing up there for Obama, was it different?
I don't think it was so antagonistic during the Obama administration years, but it certainly was antagonistic during the Nixon years. To some degree, it was antagonistic during the Reagan years, but the chief antagonist in those times was Sam Donaldson. But I think on a general level, the relationship between the press and the White House and the White House and the press is, quote, hotter than it has been in recent memory. And I think that's a factor of the person who's the president.
Journalists normally bristle when a prime minister or a president praises their work or where they work. Is it awkward for you when President Trump singles out Fox?
For me, it doesn't bother me if the president says, John's doing a fair job of covering me, because that's what I pride myself in doing, regardless of if it's a Republican president or a Democratic president or an independent or whoever, that I cover them fairly. And I don't give them a pass, but I just listen to what they have to say. I listen to what the other side has to say. I measure their policies against, what has happened in the past and what might happen in the future. And I just treat them fairly.
But he loves Fox like no other.
Well, don't forget, when it comes to Fox, we have the editorial side of Fox and we have the news side of Fox. And those two things don't really cross over very much. So my job here at Fox is to fairly and accurately cover this White House and to not inject my own opinions into anything that I'm covering, to look at things through a lens of impartiality and report on it that way. And that's what I've always done, whether I was at CBS, sitting in this chair over here, or whether I was at CNN during the morning show, or here at Fox. That's the way that I have always lived my life, even when I was at City TV back in Toronto. And that's what I will always do, is through a lens of impartiality, fairly and accurately cover this White House.
Is it awkward for you when someone like Sean Hannity or Fox and Friends appear to be very pro-Trump, and you're here trying to be a journalist holding the administration to account?
I do what I do, and the network wants me to do what I do. That's why they made me the White House correspondent. They know my background, they know my track record as a journalist, and they said, we want you to do the White House and we want you to cover it the way that you cover it, and that's what I'm doing.
When people say mainstream media, what do you hear?
I hear a pejorative label for somebody who doesn't agree with your point of view. And I think that it's a moniker that has been creative to describe people that have a different political bent or a different editorial bent than the person who's ascribing that label to them. I don't think there's really any such thing as the mainstream media. We have a tremendous amount of media in this country. It's been exploding. And I look at each and every individual outlet as pursuing news the way that they do. And people, if they want to put labels on it, they can go ahead. But I've never looked at the media as being a group of people. It's all individual outlets. So for me, the label of mainstream media doesn't really mean anything.
You're obviously still familiar with Canadian media. Mm-hmm. And, my perspective, and you can certainly disagree with it, is that it's less polarized than what I see and observe in the U.S. Is that the polarization of the media here a reflection of what Americans feel, or is it adding to that divide?
Well, I think that Canada, just in a general sense, is a less polarized nation than the United States is. I mean, this is a very polarized politically country, and I think the media is representative of that. You have some media outlets that are very conservative. You have some media outlets that are very liberal, and then you have a whole collection of people who are in the middle, some to the left of center, some to the right of center.
But does that split contribute to the polarization, or just reflect it?
I think it's reflective of the polarization. Now, on the extreme ends of things, some outlets may be contributing, particularly if they're blogs and that sort of thing, Facebook postings, whatever you want, because determining exactly what's media now is very difficult because you have this army of citizen journalists as well. So I think on the very fringes, they may be contributing to the split in the country, but I think what we see by and large is reflective of the split, and it's not a causality.
Thanks for your time.
You bet. Good to talk to you.
You too.
Thank you.
Coming up.
There's a hostility with virtually every reporter in that room.
Challenging the mainstream. We'll speak to a former Breitbart reporter who says established news outlets want Donald Trump to fail. We'll ask him to explain why he thinks that next. But first, when we were planning this roadshow, we wondered who's the most influential Canadian in Washington. We weren't sure, so we thought we'd ask around. Who is the most influential Canadian in Washington?
That's a good question. I really have no idea.
I can't think of any.
I can't think of any.
I don't know who is the Canadian.
I don't know any Canadians in Washington.
Okay, I've just asked about a half dozen people, and no one can even give me a name. We were starting to get desperate. Can't believe nobody's mentioned Ted Cruz. We asked for an interview and never heard back. And then finally, we found someone with an answer. Michael Froman, you're the former U.S. trade representative. We want to know who's the most influential Canadian in Washington. What name comes to mind?
Well, I hear Justin Bieber's in town.
Seriously?
I believe your prime minister is very influential.
Trudeau?
Your prime minister gets a lot of...
Yeah, but he's not here right now. When he visits, though, we are down for him.
Yeah.
Wish we could do tradesies, but, you know.
Absolutely.
Good news. The Bieber fan was kidding, and we finally get our answer.
Certainly, Ambassador McNaughton is very influential and has a lot of sway here in town.
Here are 5 things we learned this week from investigative journalists. A prison guard who was sexually assaulted by a male colleague at a BC prison says Corrections Canada did not protect her. The woman told CBC's Go Public that the incident, which was caught on tape, has left her unable to return to work. Breitbart boss Steve Bannon plotted to plant a mole inside Facebook just days before he took over as Donald Trump's campaign chairman last year. That's according to emails obtained by BuzzFeed News. It's unclear whether he followed up on the plan. CBC News learned the province of Nova Scotia reluctantly paid $53.4 million to cover taxes the CRA says were owed on revenue generated from video lottery terminals on First Nations communities. The province is appealing the assessment. The Washington Post reported that Russian operatives used Facebook ads to exploit America's racial and religious divisions in the lead-up to the 2016 election. Facebook is preparing to turn over a batch of more than 3,000 ads to Congress for review. And presidential advisor Jared Kushner used private email to conduct White House business, a story first reported by Politico. During last year's election campaign, Donald Trump criticized his rival Hillary Clinton for her use of private email when she was Secretary of State. Investigative stories like that one about Donald Trump's inner circle have only deepened the mistrust between those who support the president and those who oppose him. And Trump's most ardent backers largely dismiss that reporting and continue to look for the truth elsewhere. Breitbart has become the go-to news source for people who believe the news media is getting it wrong.
We admit that we have a worldview, which is populist, nationalist, grassroots, conservative.
Its former head, Steve Bannon, left the website to work for Trump. And though he's now back at Breitbart, he is not bipartisan.
We're not here to defy President Trump. We were here to praise and honor him.
Breitbart is just one of many conservative-leaning outlets that have gained prominence in a polarized political climate.
You're the globalists. You're the outside threat. You're the traitors.
Now, the left is okay with this because the left dominates the culture.
Shows just how unintelligent this political commentator is.
Neil W. McCabe is a former Breitbart political reporter who's recently left the company to join Big League Politics, launched by another former Breitbarter. The website says it's dedicated to investigative journalism, that it's neither conservative nor liberal. So, mainstream? Definitely not, according to McCabe. So let me start with, your time at Breitbart. Now you're with Big League Politics. And if these are meant to be an antidote to the mainstream media, and we hear that phrase, what does mainstream media mean and what's wrong with it?
Well, I think there's one way of thinking of it is sort of the big media outlets like the CNNs and the New York Times and Washington Post. These are sort of like they put out that narrative that carries the day. And that narrative is usually the establishment narrative, and it doesn't always reflect what's going on.
But isn't the establishment now Trump? I mean, he's in the White House.
I would suggest to you very strongly that Trump is not the establishment or the establishment media. I mean, a very good friend of mine, Neil Monroe, interrupted President Obama once. And I believe he's the only reporter who ever interrupted Obama during a press conference. He lost his press credentials. In this administration, the reporters just yell and scream and interrupt the president every time. It's really unreal.
But isn't that something that he invites in his demeanor? He doesn't seem really put off by it. He seems to enjoy that sort of to and fro.
But certainly you gather that there's a hostility with virtually every reporter in that room compared to what happened with President Obama. There was a fawning of President Obama. There was a celebration of President Obama. There's no celebration of Donald Trump among the reporters at the White House.
But Big League Politics says on its website, we're neither Democrats nor Republicans. We're investigative journalists. We want to get at the truth and expose that for people. So how do you do that and get at what you believe the truth is, but also feel that you're kind of the antidote to what you think is not being shared properly?
I think if I can talk about it this way professionally, the truth is that reporters keep more secrets than they ever tell. The reporters are actually the ones who hold secrets back from the people because they want to protect the relationship or because they don't think the readers or the audience can handle it. And I think what we're trying to do is we're saying we don't have those relationships, and so we're looking to tell the truth as it is.
But in time, don't you have those relationships? I mean, if journalists have sources or people that they want to be able to reach out to, isn't that part of journalism, is that you do make connections with people?
Oh, I mean, and that's the dance. And so as we do that dance, we're going to try to be on the side of letting people know what's really going on. And we're not part of the establishment. And so, you know, we're not part of the cheering section of the establishment that you see at sort of like a Politico or a CNN, CBS, NBC, ABC, PBS, I mean, National Public Radio, I mean, the Associated Press, USA Today. You know, it's unreal that every day you can look at these papers and they're attacking Trump and the Republican Party and the conservatives, whereas, you know, a year ago, they were doing the complete opposite.
There seems to be a polarization of the news media in the U.S. where people seem to be pretty clearly within their jobs leaning left or right. And I would say that that's not exactly the way it is in Canada. There's less of that. Why does that exist here? Is that holding up a mirror to the way people feel and the politics of the place and the fact that it's a pretty split country right now? Or is that approach of the media exacerbating the differences?
You know, people tell me, they say, why can't we go back to the 1970s when everybody in Washington got along? Well, the 1970s, you know, the Democrats railroaded out of the White House a president who won 49 states. So I would say there's always going to be that polarization and that divisiveness. It's because the White House is winner take all, whereas in a parliamentary system, you can sort of fiddle in the middle.
So if there is this greater polarization here, how do people know they're getting the truth? Do they read both sides? Do they have to consume a lot to know that they're getting the middle?
It's called the marketplace of ideas.
Yeah.
And it's like you just have to throw it up. And I think people should be concerned if someone in the government is going after Facebook over fake news. The problem with fake news is you don't want some bureaucrat deciding what fake news is. You want a competing media outlet to go after it. It's sort of like, you know, Chevrolet and Ford sort of watch each other so nobody can get away with too much. That's sort of the antidote to so-called fake news.
The one question I was curious about, we hear Trump say, you know, CNN is fake news or the main nets are fake news, but he will champion Fox and Friends or Hannity. What do you want him to say about big league politics? Would you be happy if he liked it? Or most journalists are appalled when the president, the prime minister is happy with their work because they feel like they're not really holding them to account.
I used to work for Human Events, which was a 70-year-old political newspaper that passed away recently. President Reagan brought the guys who ran Human Events into the Oval Office to scream at him. And he waved the paper at him and he said, "Boys, I want you to know that ever since I've been president, I've been reading your paper more and more and enjoying it less and less." And that's what I want from President Trump.
So you're not looking for him to say, "You guys are great."
I don't want to be the ambassador of France. I mean, what would I need from him? You know, it's like I'm a reporter. You know, I would like to be considered solid political intelligence so that somebody can read one of my articles and they can basically BS their way through a meeting or a conversation.
What is the thing that you think Canadians most need to know about the media in the U.S. right now?
I mean, it's a free-for-all. And it's that clash of ideas, but it's also, you know, there's competing elites, there's regionalism. I mean, this is a big country of 300 million people, and it's all sort of smashing together all the time. But what you do have is you do have an establishment in this country that controls the apparatus, that controls the institutions, that sort of, it's inside the civil service and the bureaucracy, it's inside the universities and, you know, and the corporate boardrooms, and they're sort of wanting to hold on to the power that they have.
Neil, thank you very much. Really enjoyed talking to you. Still ahead. NFL players fire back, Trump bashes them. The furor over NFL players taking a knee dominated headlines this week. So what does it say about the political and media divide in the U.S.? My POV just ahead. Got a story tip for the investigators? Share it anonymously at securedrop.cbc.ca. You can also reach us through email, investigators@cbc.ca, or just say hi on Twitter @SwainDiana. And make sure to catch us at our regular time each week, Saturdays at 9:30 p.m. Eastern and Sundays at 5:30 p.m. Eastern on CBC News Network. You're watching The Investigators. We're back in Washington. It's been an interesting week to be here. Much of the conversation in the news media has been about athletes protesting before games. Though Colin Kaepernick did it first months ago, Trump's criticism of the NFL earlier this month spurred mass protests last Sunday. Some locked arms, some took a knee, some stayed off the field during the anthem. Then Canadian teams weighed in, saying they would respect their players' right to protest. But as if to underscore just how polarized opinions have become here, this has quickly become a fight over what they were protesting. The players say it's the president's words and the racial divide that's undeniable here.
Yeah, I took it personally, but at the same time, like I said in my Twitter post, it's bigger than me, man. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's bigger than me. I got a daughter. She's gonna have to live in this world.
The president claims they're actually protests against the flag, the military, and patriotism. And many Americans see it his way.
But I'm not watching you anymore, and I'm not paying your way.
Though even some at Fox News couldn't support the president's take.
They're upset about racial injustice in the country, and they're upset about the things that the president has said.
But the very idea that a peaceful protest could spur such a furious response seems to underscore just how divided things are here. And the fractured media landscape may be just reflecting that. I'm Diana Swain. We are The Investigators. Now stay tuned for The Fifth Estate.